Alright, so in this video I'm going to talk about the biochemistry of water, but first I did get to finish what I was saying on the previous video, which was about hydrogen bonds. So hydrogen bonds are fairly weak compared to covalent and ionic bonds. These are intermolecular attractions. So intermolecular, think of in between molecules that occur between polar molecules. So they are often depicted as dots in chemical diagrams. Hydrogen bonding is very important in water due to its polar nature. So if we zoom in on my little DNA structure over here, hydrogen bonds are very important when talking about DNA. If there were not hydrogen bonds in between these nitrogenous bases, the A's and T's and C's and G's of DNA, then the DNA would not unwind like a zipper to make new strands of DNA. So hydrogen bonds are indicated by dots. So if we select, let's go with purple or violet, we put some dots, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So in between these nitrogenous bases are these weak attractions known as hydrogen bonds, and obviously hydrogen is involved in that attraction. So not a typical sharing or transfer of electrons like you see in covalent bonds or ionic bonds, just a weak attraction. Okay, it's like when you see somebody who's attractive that you really like and you follow that person around, you are weakly attracted to that person because somebody, or let's say you're staring at that person, you can just run into a light pole and that bond is broken. However, a covalent bond would be more like you have a zip tie around your wrist and their wrist, and where they go, you follow. So covalent bonds are much stronger. So again, if we look at our DNA, the rungs of this ladder, quote unquote, this DNA ladder, what type of bonds hold these molecules together? These are very strong bonds that you do not want to break. So you're probably guessing covalent bonds, and you're correct. We do not want hydrogen bonds to hold these ladder rungs together, these what are called sugar backbones of the DNA. We want those to be very strong. And in fact, DNA is a very strong, stable molecule. All right, so notice I'm going to skip over the van der Waals attractions or London dispersion forces. Not very significant for what we're going to cover. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the biochemistry of water. Water supports life on Earth. Water makes up 70% of the bodies of most organisms. It's like I said in the previous video, without water, most life could not exist for more than just one way. So we have these biogeochemical cycles. These refer to the cycling of matter. And then you've all heard of the water cycle, I would assume. We have water vapor is generated by the sun, causing evaporation of water from oceans, lakes, rivers, trees, etc. This water vapor rises and condenses to form rain and snow, referred to as precipitation, is returned to the land or ocean. Eventually the water that lands back on the earth makes its way to plants or rivers and streams that lead back to the oceans. Plants take in the water and use it for photosynthesis, but also can lose it in the form of transpiration to the air. All right, and that part there is actually, we're going to talk about how water moves through plants, and it has to do with this transpiration. We'll talk more about that later though. So right here you've got a nice diagram of the water cycle. So fairly complex, simple, whatever you think. Precipitation falls to the ground, surface water runs into the ocean, or you could have percolation, where water seeps through the ground and creates underground water. If you live outside of town, you may be familiar with this. Your parents or whoever may have had to dig a well to access water. I know my father just had a well dug, and they had to go 300 feet under the ground, and they came across all sorts of different layers of the earth, even ancient shells, which I thought was amazing. There were shells there, no water around anywhere near their house, but there were shells under the water. So what does that tell you? All right, so then to the ocean, sun evaporates, clouds, precipitation, on and on, water cycle. Water is a polar molecule because of the high electronegativity of oxygen and low electronegativity of hydrogen. The oxygen end of the water molecule has a slight negative charge. All right, so this is what we were talking about the other day when we were talking about polar bonds. So here's a water molecule, and you'll notice you have two hydrogens here, and they have a positive charge, which gives you a positive region, and then a negative region due to the high electronegativity of the oxygen. The water molecule's shape is said to be bent. This shape means that one side of the molecule, the hydrogen side, is positive while the other side is negative. The polar water molecules form hydrogen bonds with each other. These bonds affect many of the biologically important properties of water. So here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 water molecules. So you'll notice, look at the center water molecule. What is it doing? How's it interacting with this water molecule and this one and this one and this one? Well, here's one of your hydrogens with this positive region with this hydrogen bond. See the dots that indicate the hydrogen bond, this weak attraction, and it is pulling towards this electronegative oxygen. And then same here, hydrogen to oxygen, hydrogen to oxygen, hydrogen to oxygen. And that causes all of these water molecules to want to stick together in what is known as cohesiveness. Cohesiveness is very important for these important properties of water for biology. Okay, so this is an animation of water molecules interacting with each other. And so if we hit play, you see these water molecules moving around. Now notice these little lines here with the dots. Can you guess what those are? They're not covalent bonds. They're not ionic bonds. They're bonds between hydrogen and oxygen. Well, they're not typically a bond, right? They're an attraction. So these are hydrogen bonds. So notice all these water molecules want to attract to each other and stick together. And notice what happens as the water gets colder and the water begins to turn into ice. These guys start to settle down into the structured order. They're still moving because absolute zero has not been reached. At absolute zero, the molecules would completely stand still with no movement. So even in ice, water molecules are still moving around, generating some sort of thermal energy. So I wanted you to see that animation so that we could talk about these important properties. So water has a high specific heat. Specific heat refers to the amount of heat needed to change the temperature of 1 gram of water, 1 gram of a substance by 1 degree. Water's specific heat is very high due to the hydrogen bond that hold the water molecules together. So what does that mean? What does that have to do with anything? Well, if you keep reading on, due to its high specific heat, water is excellent for helping to maintain a constant internal body temperature. Large bodies of water have fairly constant temperatures. Water also helps to moderate the air temperatures of land masses located near large bodies of water. So if you are like me and you spend a lot of time on water, if you go to certain bodies of water during summertime versus during wintertime, the temperature is still relatively the same because of water having a high specific heat. So water is able to absorb heat, a lot of it. Of course, the larger the body of water, the more heat, like the ocean, can absorb a ton of heat and helps to keep the planet cool. And that is because of the structure of water and its hydrogen bonding. Water is an excellent solvent. You probably learned this in chemistry. Water is often referred to as the universal solvent. This means that it is great at dissolving other materials, solutes. Due to its polarity, water is best at dissolving salts and polar molecules. This is important in biology because it allows vital nutrients and gases to be dissolved and transported through the body and through the ground. So, if you've ever asked the question, why do I need water? Well, 1, high specific heat, 2, excellent solvent. So the things that you eat, water helps you dissolve those things and then helps to diffuse minerals from your digestive system into your cells so that your cells can use those nutrients. Water has a high heat of vaporization. So this is important whenever you sweat. Heat of vaporization refers to the amount of heat needed to convert a liquid to a gas. Due to the many hydrogen bonds which hold water molecules together, the heat of vaporization is very high for water. When the water does eventually evaporate, it carries heat away. This is important in biology because it allows processes like sweating and transpiration to cool off organisms through the process of evaporative cooling. So if I ever ask you, what is an example of having what is an example of an advantage of water having a high heat of vaporization for living things like us? Sweat. So whenever your external body temperature reaches a certain temp, your sweat glands secrete sweat. That heat from the skin is absorbed, and then the sweat evaporates and takes that heat away from your body, cooling you off. Water is cohesive and adhesive, something that I said a minute ago. Due to its polarity, water molecules stick to each other, cohesion, and to other polar molecules, adhesion. This property allows transpiration, the movement of water through the xylem of plants, to move water from the ground through the plant and eventually into the air. So think of cohesiveness and adhesiveness as the example that I gave earlier of you being attracted to someone and you're watching that person, following that person around. That is cohesiveness. You're following that person around due to that weak hydrogen attraction. And then adhesiveness would be, an attraction toward a similar type of molecule, a polar molecule, but not another water molecule. And then, as you saw in the video, water expands as it freezes. Like most other compounds, the volume of water contracts as it cools down, but unlike most other materials, the volume of water begins to expand after it cools to temperatures below 4 degrees Celsius. So basically, by increasing volume, the water begins to take up more space. You've experienced this if you've ever left a can in a freezer and then came back after it froze, and then that can had exploded or at least expanded beyond the capacity of the aluminum. The water inside expands. This causes ice to be less dense than water. So this is very important for organisms that live in cold places underwater. So why don't fish in a frozen lake freeze? How do they live through the wintertime? This means that ice floats on liquid water. So some of the water at the top freezes and sits on top of the warmer water below. This happens because hydrogen bonds force the chains of water molecules further apart as the molecules cool down and slow down. This increased volume causes a decrease in density. This property is important to life because as bodies of water freeze, the ice floats up and insulates the liquid water underneath. This allows aquatic life to survive long, cold winters. So basically, that ice forms a cap that is necessary for those fish to live, because however cold it is under that ice, it's still warm enough for fish to live, and it's not too cold for the ice to freeze. And so if we go back to our video from a minute ago, we can see that. Watch what happens to the water molecules as they cool off. So right now they're kind of random and all over the place, and you can see they're gradually losing energy, and those hydrogen bonds are starting to pull them together to form this lattice, this structure. And now you have this structure. So notice all this space in between water molecules. This should help you gain a visual as to why water expands, because each water molecule is then pushing another one, pushing and pulling another one to form this structure. Whereas before they were all just randomly scrambled within there. Now there's these ordered spaces in between each water molecule. All right, and so that is the end of this video for water properties.